There is a special kind of poison found only at high society galas, where the champagne is vintage and the smiles are entirely counterfeit. I am Zoey West, the architect of this botanical paradise, but tonight I am not here to prune the roses. I am here to uproot a 14-year-old lie. My parents discarded me at a mall when I was a child, claiming I was bad luck for their business. Now they have returned to bask in my spotlight, unaware that I have designed this evening to expose their rot. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The scent of jasmine hung heavy in the air as the limousine approached the gates. The evening air smelled of night-blooming jasmine, an expensive perfume, a heady combination that usually signaled the height of success in my line of work. From where I stood on the limestone balcony of the gilded trellis botanical gardens, the scene below looked less like a party and more like a living impressionist painting. Women in shimmering gowns drifted like petals across the manicured lawns, and men in tuxedos stood stiff as topiaries, swirling scotch in crystal glasses. The string quartet, tucked away in the gazebo, played a soft waltz that floated up to me, competing with the rhythmic chirp of crickets in the hedges. Tonight was the unveiling of the Midnight Orchid Wing, a project that had consumed 3 years of my life and cemented my reputation as the state's premier landscape architect. By all accounts, I should have been down there, basking in the adoration of the town's elite, accepting champagne and compliments with a humble tilt of my head. But I wasn't looking at the flowers. I wasn't admiring the strategic lighting that made the weeping willows look like cascading silver fountains. My hands were gripping the cold iron railing of the balcony so hard my knuckles had turned white. My eyes were fixed on the main gate, specifically on the winding gravel driveway where the valet stand was overwhelmed with luxury sedans. I was waiting, not for a donor and not for the press. I was waiting for the West family. I had sent the invitation myself, embossed on heavy cream cardstock with gold leaf lettering. I knew they wouldn't be able to refuse. The gala was the most exclusive ticket in the county, the kind of event where business deals were whispered over rare hybrids and social standings were cemented for the coming year. For a family as obsessed with appearances as the West's, declining would be social suicide. They didn't know the invitation came from me, of course. To them, the name on the return address was just the Gilded Trellis Administration. They had no idea that the guest of honor and the head architect listed on the program was the same girl they had discarded like a weed 14 years ago. I subconsciously rubbed the faint, jagged scar on my left palm, a nervous habit I couldn't quite break. It wasn't from a gardening tool. It was from a soda can tab I had sliced my hand on while sitting on a hard wooden bench in the grand atrium of the Bayview Mall. I closed my eyes for a second, and the smell of jasmine vanished, replaced by the scent of stale popcorn and floor wax. I was 14 then, old enough to know better, but young enough to still crave approval. My father, Richard West, had been spiraling. His real estate investments were tanking, and he had developed a frantic, superstitious logic to explain his failures. It wasn't the market, and it certainly wasn't his poor judgment. It was bad luck. And in his twisted narrative, I was the lightning rod for that misfortune. If I was in the car, he hit traffic. If I was at the dinner table, he spilled his coffee. It started as jokes, then snide comments, and finally a cold, hard resentment. My brother Tyler was the golden boy. He was 2 years older, loud, brash, and in my parents' eyes, the lucky charm. If Tyler picked a stock, it went up. If Tyler scratched a lottery ticket, he won $5. They doted on him with a fervor that bordered on worship, while I was treated like a drafty window they couldn't figure out how to seal. That Saturday at the mall was supposed to be a family day. I remember feeling a rare spark of hope because my mother, Linda, had actually suggested I come along. We sat on a bench near the fountain. My father looked at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth, just a flat calculation. "Zoe," he had said, checking his watch, "we need to go into the jewelry store to look at a watch for Tyler's graduation. It's a very small shop. High security. They don't like crowds. You wait here. Can I come look?" I had asked, clutching a soda can. "No," my mother snapped, smoothing her skirt. "You know how you are. You're clumsy. You'll knock something over. Just stay put. We'll be 20 minutes. Don't move." I watched them walk away. Tyler looked back once, not with pity, but with a smirk, before he turned and slung his arm around our father's shoulder. I sat there for 20 minutes, then an hour, then 3. The mall began to close. The security guard, a kind man named Mike who used to patrol our neighborhood before he took the mall job, found me as the grate was coming down over the entrance. Zoey. He had asked his flashlight beam cutting through the dim atrium. "Where are your folks?" "Shopping." I had whispered, though. The cold stone in my stomach told me otherwise. They never came back. I found out later. They had driven straight out of the parking lot, merged onto the interstate, and gone on a celebratory vacation to the coast. When the authorities finally contacted them, my father claimed I had run away, that I was uncontrollable and a danger to their household peace. He spun a tale of a troubled youth that the overworked social workers didn't have the time to unravel. I went into the foster system that night. I lost my room, my clothes, my history, but I gained something else: freedom. I didn't break. I didn't crumble. I rooted myself in the earth. I started working in community gardens, then landscaping crews, learning that unlike people, soil was honest. If you treated it right, it gave back. I put myself through college on scholarships and sweat building a life defined by resilience and the kind of American grit my father preached about, but never practiced. I became Zoey the architect, a woman who could turn a barren plot into a paradise. And now I was going to show them exactly what they had thrown away. A flash of headlights sweeping across the front gate snapped me back to the present. My heart hammered against my ribs, a distinct rhythmic thud that echoed in my ears. A stretched limousine, sleek and black, rolled up the gravel drive. It was older than the other cars, a rental model that was trying too hard to look regal. It stopped right in front of the fountain I had designed. The driver opened the back door. First came the polished shoe, then the leg. Richard West stepped out. He looked older, his hair thinner and dyed a shade of black that was too harsh for his complexion. He buttoned his suit jacket with a frantic energy. I recognized the desperation of a man trying to sell a lie. Next came my mother, Linda. She was draped in a fur stole that looked moth-eaten under the high-definition security lights. She was smiling, but it was a tight, practiced grimace, her eyes scanning the crowd, not for friends, but for people who could do something for her. And finally, Tyler. He stumbled as he exited the vehicle, catching himself on the doorframe. Even from the balcony, I could see his tie was crooked and his face was flushed. He laughed loudly at something the valet said, a harsh braying sound that cut through the elegant string music. He hadn't changed. He was still the spoiled prince, only now the polish had worn off, revealing the rot underneath. They walked toward the entrance, heads held high, radiating an unearned arrogance. They were walking into my world now. They were walking into a garden where I controlled the paths, the lighting, and the exits. I took a deep breath, smoothing the silk of my emerald green dress. It was time to go downstairs. It was time to welcome my family home. Seeing them again brought a sharp, stinging pain to my chest that I thought I had buried years ago. That specific, hollow ache of being left behind by the people who were supposed to protect you. If you have ever felt that sting, or if you've ever had to build yourself back up after the people you trusted let you down, please leave a comment below. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. Descending the grand staircase of the gilded trellis felt like wading into a deep, warm pool. The hum of conversation rose to meet me, a symphony of polite laughter and clinking crystal. This was the environment I had curated with surgical precision. My revenge wasn't about shouting matches or public scenes, at least not ones I would cause. It was about placing 3 people who lacked substance into a world that demanded it. I had built a social pressure cooker, a high-altitude environment where the air was too thin for imposters. The West family thrived on bullying and bluster in the safe, small pond of their suburban bubble. But here, every interaction was a test of character, and I knew they had forgotten to study. I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments on the hydrangeas and the geometric hedge mazes, but my trajectory was locked. I was a heat-seeking missile in emerald silk. I spotted them near the open bar naturally. They stood out not because of their clothes, but because of their energy. The room was relaxed. They were frantic. My father, Richard, was cornering a silver-haired man I recognized as the city council chairman, gesturing wildly with a half-eaten shrimp skewer. My mother, Linda, was scanning the room with the predatory gaze of a hawk, looking for a field mouse, judging hemlines and jewelry. And Tyler was already leaning heavily against a marble pillar, his face flushed a mottled red that clashed with his expensive tie. I paused, taking a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray to steady my hands. This was the moment. I had to become the person they never thought I could be, someone who belonged here. I approached them with a practiced smile, the kind that didn't quite reach the eyes if you looked closely enough. But I knew they wouldn't look. They never did. "Good evening," I said, my voice smooth and low. "I hope you're enjoying the gala." Richard spun around, annoyance flashing across his face at the interruption before he assessed my attire and realized I wasn't a waitress. His expression morphed instantly into a greasy, ingratiating smile. "Charmed, I'm sure. It's a decent spread. A bit heavy on the greenery for my taste, but the shrimp is adequate." "I'm Zoey," I said, extending a hand. I didn't offer my last name. I knew their narcissism would fill in the blanks. They would assume I was a donor's daughter or a junior socialite. "I'm the lead landscape architect for the project." "An architect?" Richard boomed, pumping my hand with sweaty enthusiasm. "Finally, someone who works for a living. You know, it's impossible to find good talent these days. Absolute nightmare. I run a consultancy firm, very high level, and the laziness I see, it's a disease." "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my tone polite. "Hard to find people with the right dedication." "Exactly." He leaned in conspiratorial and smelling of gin. "Loyalty is dead. I had a daughter once years ago. We gave her everything. Roof over her head, food on the table. But she was difficult, bad energy. You know the type, just a black cloud. She ran off when she was 14, couldn't handle the standards of a successful family, probably dead in a ditch somewhere or flipping burgers. It's a tragedy, really, how she threw our generosity back in our faces." The lie was so smooth, so rehearsed, it almost took my breath away. He had turned his cruelty into martyrdom. He had rewritten the memory of abandoning a child at a mall into a saga of a rebellious teen fleeing a loving home. My stomach churned a hot coal of anger, igniting in my gut, but I forced my smile to widen. "That sounds heartbreaking." I said the word tasting like ash. "It must be hard to carry that." "We manage," Linda chimed in, stepping forward. She didn't look me in the eye. She was staring at my necklace, assessing its carat weight. "We have our son, Tyler. Come say hello to the lady." Tyler peeled himself off the pillar and stumbled over. Up close, he looked worse. His eyes were glassy, and he had a smear of cocktail sauce on his lapel. "What's up?" he slurred, looking me up and down with a lecherous grin that made my skin crawl. "You the gardener?" "I designed the gardens, yes," I corrected him, stepping back slightly to avoid the waft of alcohol on his breath. "Boring," Tyler scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just a bunch of flowers. Anyone can plant a flower. My dad pays guys minimum wage to do this in our yard every Tuesday." "Tyler has a very discerning eye," Linda said, quickly defending him before I could speak. "He knows quality, and frankly, I have to agree. The layout is a bit chaotic, isn't it? Very wild. I prefer something more controlled, more symmetrical. This feels a bit messy." "We aimed for an organic flow," I said, my voice tightening. "American landscapes are about freedom, not just control. It's about letting things grow where they thrive." "Well, I'd have fired you." Tyler laughed, stumbling as he tried to grab a passing waiter's arm for another drink. "Bad luck to have weeds everywhere." The irony was suffocating. Here was the lucky charm, a liability in a $2,000 suit insulting the woman who was currently the guest of honor. But I couldn't snap. Not yet. I had to guide them to the edge of the cliff. You really must see the centerpiece before you make up your minds, I said, gesturing toward the roped-off section at the far end of the ballroom. The midnight orchid. It's the rarest specimen in the hemisphere. It's the reason we're all here tonight. The midnight orchid. Richard's ears perked up at the word rare. To him, rare meant expensive, and expensive meant he needed to be near it. Well, led the way, Zoe. Let's see if it lives up to the hype. I led them through the crowd, feeling the eyes of the other guests on us. People were whispering. They saw the drunk young man, the loud father, the haughty mother. They saw the disconnect between the elegance of the room and the crassness of the West family. I was merely the tour guide to their social execution. We arrived at the exhibit. The midnight orchid sat on a singular white pedestal in the center of a raised platform surrounded by a delicate trellis arch. It was breathtaking. Dark, velvety purple petals dusted with gold pollen illuminated by a single focused beam of light. It was fragile, ancient, and priceless. Mr. Sterling, the gala organizer, and a man who treated plants better than people, was standing guard. He looked nervous as he saw Tyler swaying. "Zoe," Sterling whispered, stepping in front of the display. "Please, the root system is incredibly sensitive. The vibrations alone keep the crowd back." "It's fine, Sterling," I said loudly enough for my father to hear. "Mr. West is a connoisseur. He just wants a closer look." "Damn right," Richard blustered, pushing past the velvet rope. "Don't tell me where to stand. I'm a donor. Or I will be, if this thing is worth my time." He dragged Tyler with him. "Look at that tie. Take a picture. We'll put it on the company website. Show people we appreciate the arts." Tyler fumbled for his phone, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He was standing dangerously close to the pedestal. The platform was narrow, designed for visual impact, not for two grown men to jostle for a selfie angle. "It's just a purple flower, Dad," Tyler grumbled, leaning back to get the angle his heel hovering over the edge of the platform drop off. "Who cares?" "Smile," Richard commanded, grabbing Tyler's shoulder to pull him into the frame. Tyler lurched. His foot slipped. He flailed his arms, swinging out wildly to catch his balance. My heart stopped. I watched in slow motion as his hand grasped for the only solid thing nearby, the delicate trellis supporting the orchid. The wood creaked. Sterling gasped. The tension in the room snapped like a dry twig. I stood perfectly still, watching the disaster I had invited unfold, knowing that once gravity took over, there was no going back. Dealing with toxic family members in private is painful enough, but managing their chaos in public, especially when your own reputation is on the line, is a unique kind of nightmare. The anxiety of watching them teeter on the edge of causing a scene while you have to maintain a polite smile is exhausting. If you've ever had to hold your breath at a wedding, a graduation, or a holiday dinner, hoping someone wouldn't ruin the moment, please leave a comment below. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The disaster I had anticipated in the orchid wing didn't happen immediately. It was teased like a thunderclap that rumbles but doesn't bring rain. When Tyler stumbled, his heavy Oxford shoes skidding on the polished edge of the platform, Mr. Sterling lunged with the agility of a man half his age. He caught the velvet rope just as Tyler's weight bore down on it, creating a barrier that bounced my brother back onto his heels rather than into the display. "Careful," Sterling hissed, his face draining of color. "Sir, please, step back." Tyler laughed a wet hacking sound and brushed Sterling's hand away. "Relax, old man. I've got balance. I'm an athlete. Or I was. Varsity, remember?" He looked at our father for validation, but Richard West wasn't looking at him. Richard was looking at the room. The overhead chandeliers began to dim, a cascading wave of darkness that hushed the chatter of the 300 guests. A single crisp spotlight cut through the gloom, searching the floor. It bypassed the mayor, bypassed the donors, and landed squarely on me. The sudden brightness was blinding, turning the crowd into a sea of silhouettes, but I didn't flinch. I had practiced this moment in the mirror of my studio apartment for weeks. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the high-fidelity speakers, "please direct your attention to the stage. We are honored to present the visionary behind tonight's unveiling, the artist who coaxed life from this soil, and designed the Midnight Orchid Wing. Please welcome Ms. Zoey West. The name hung in the air, echoing off the glass ceiling. I heard the gasp before I saw it. It came from my left where my parents were standing. I turned just enough to see Richard's jaw go slack. Linda dropped her clutch. For a heartbeat, they were frozen, their brains trying to reconcile the abandoned burden they had left at a mall with the celebrated woman standing in the light. I walked toward the stage. The applause was polite at first, then swelled into a genuine roar as the local elite recognized the work I had done. I ascended the stairs, took the microphone from the stand, and looked out. I saw them. They were pushing their way to the front elbows, flying Richard's shock, rapidly morphing into something else opportunism. He saw the applause. He saw the adoration. And like a parasite sensing a fresh host, he wanted to feed on it. Thank you, I began, my voice steady. When I first envisioned this garden, I wanted to create a place where resilience could bloom. I wanted to show that even in the darkest soil, I never finished the sentence. There was a commotion at the frantic edge of the stage. Heavy footsteps thudded against the wooden stairs. Security moved to intercept, but Richard West was shouting, his voice booming with a performative joviality that made my stomach turn. That's my girl. That's my daughter. He shoved past a confused security guard waving his arms. Let me through. I'm her father. That's Zoey, the crowd murmured. The guard hesitated, stopping a father from congratulating. His daughter played poorly in high society. Richard seized that hesitation. He bounded onto the stage, his face glistening with sweat and greed. He didn't hug me. He didn't look me in the eye to apologize. He went straight for the microphone. He grabbed the stand, leaning in close to me, effectively boxing me out of my own spotlight. Zoey, honey, incredible, absolutely incredible. He turned to the crowd, creating a physical barrier between me and the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard bellowed, his voice cracking slightly as he projected to the back of the room. I cannot tell you how proud I am. We are, her mother and I. He gestured vaguely to where Linda was beaming up at him, playing the part of the doting matriarch. You know, when Zoey was a little girl, we saw this spark in her. We knew she was special. It wasn't easy, let me tell you. Nurturing a talent like this takes resources. It takes sacrifice. I stood like a statue, my hands clasped in front of me. I could have fought him for the mic. I could have screamed that he was a liar. But I knew the rules of this arena better than he did. In high society, the person who screams loses. The person who remains poised while being wronged wins the sympathy. I let him talk. I let him pile the dirt onto his own casket. We sent her to the best schools. Richard lied, the falsehoods flowing effortlessly. We funded her travels to Europe to study the great gardens. We pushed her. Yes, sometimes we were hard on her. But look at the result. The West family has always been about excellence. And tonight you're seeing the product of our parenting. This isn't just Zoe's success. It's a West family victory. The applause was scattered now. People were exchanging glances. They knew I had come up through the foster system. It was part of my public bio in the program listed under Early Life and Inspirations. They were watching a man claim credit for a woman he hadn't spoken to in 14 years. The tension in the room was thickening, curdling like milk in the sun. But while Richard was busy stealing my glory, he had forgotten the one volatile element he had brought with him. Tyler was alone near the exhibit. He had been watching his father on stage, watching the crowd look at me with admiration and watching Richard claim that I was the family success story. The lucky charm was being ignored. The golden boy was tarnished. I could see him from the stage, a dark shape in the peripheral gloom. He was seething. He took a swig of a drink he must have swiped from a passing tray and glared at the midnight orchid. To him, that flower was the enemy. It was the thing getting all the attention. It was the reason his father was praising the sister he had been taught to despise. Tyler lurched toward the pedestal. The security guard, distracted by the drama on stage, wasn't watching him closely enough. Tyler didn't just lean this time. He wanted to be part of the show. He wanted to prove he was just as important as the flower. Hey, Tyler shouted from the floor, his voice slurring, but loud enough to cut through Richard's monologue. Hey, Dad, look at me, Richard faltered, looking down. Tyler, not now, son. We're having a moment. Forget her, Tyler yelled. He swung his leg over the velvet rope. I can pose too. Look a photo for the website, right? He tried to strike a pose, leaning his hip against the central display stand. The one Sterling had warned was fragile, the one designed for aesthetics, not structural support. Tyler, get down. I said, my voice cutting through the microphone the first time I had spoken since Richard interrupted. It was too late. Tyler's weight shifted. He was heavy, uncoordinated, and full of gin. He missed his footing on the slick platform and fell backward. His arm flailed out, hooking around the main stem of the support trellis. There was a sound that seemed to last forever, a sickening dry crack of splintering wood. The trellis snapped at the base. Tyler fell hard, his body slamming onto the platform, dragging the structure down with him. The prize-winning midnight orchid, the botanical miracle that had taken a decade to cultivate, toppled in slow motion. The ceramic pot hit the marble floor. Crash! The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed space. Shards of hand-painted clay exploded outward. Dirt, black, rich composted soil sprayed across the pristine white floor and onto the hem of Linda's fur coat. The orchid itself, the delicate purple bloom, was crushed instantly under the weight of the wooden beam and Tyler's shoulder. The music stopped. The chatter died instantly. Richard froze mid-gesture, his mouth hanging open, the microphone drooping in his hand. Total suffocating silence descended on the gilded trellis. Tyler groaned, rolling over in the debris covered in dirt with the mangled remains of the priceless flower sticking out from under his ribcage. He looked up, blinking blearily, into the blinding spotlight that had swiveled from me to the scene of the crime. Whoops, he whispered the sound, amplified by the acoustics of the silent room. I stood on the stage looking down at the wreckage of the flower. My heart broke for the plant, but as I looked at the horrified faces of the board of directors, the disgust on the faces of the donors, and the absolute terror in my father's eyes, I realized the destruction was complete. The flower was dead, but so was the West family name. The silence that followed the crash was heavier than the humid air in the greenhouse. It was a vacuum sucking the oxygen out of the room, broken only by the whimpering sound of my brother Tyler trying to untangle his legs from the splintered remains of the trellis. He sat up, his face smeared with the expensive composted black soil I had hand-selected for the exhibit. He looked like a petulant child who had been playing in the mud, except he was 29 years old and wearing a ruined Italian suit. Then the vacuum broke. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed immediately by the sharp, angry murmur of 300 wealthy patrons, realizing their evening had been spoiled. Mr. Sterling, the gala organizer, rushed past me, his face a mask of pure horror. He fell to his knees beside the crushed orchid, his hands hovering over the bruised, broken petals, as if he could heal them by will alone. Ruined, Sterling whispered, his voice trembling with a grief that only a true botanist could understand. It's decapitated. On stage, the spell of Richard West's charisma evaporated instantly. The proud father mask fell away, revealing the cornered, vicious animal underneath. He realized in a split second that the photo op was gone, the glory was dead, and someone had to pay, and it certainly wasn't going to be him. He whirled on me, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. What kind of shoddy craftsmanship is this? He bellowed into the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers, causing feedback that made the guests wince. You call yourself an architect. That structure was a death trap. My son could have been killed. He pointed a shaking finger at me, desperation leaking from his pores. This is negligence. I told you she was trouble. I told you she was bad luck. She designed a faulty stand to embarrass us. I stepped back from the microphone, letting his voice echo in the hall. I didn't need to shout. The evidence was lying on the floor in a pile of dirt and gin. The crowd wasn't looking at me with suspicion. They were looking at Richard with absolute disgust. In their world, accidents happened, but making a scene and blaming the host for your own family's drunken clumsiness was the unforgivable sin. The stand was rated for delicate flora. Richard, I said, my voice calm, projecting purely from the diaphragm without the aid of the mic. Not for a grown man using it as a leaning post for a selfie. Don't you talk back to me, Linda screeched from the floor. She was trying to brush dirt off her fur coat, smearing it further into the pelt. We are the victims here. We are the Wests. We are donors. You are trespassing. A deep voice cut through the chaos. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A phalanx of security guards in dark blazers moved in, efficient and grim. Leading them was the head of security, a man with broad shoulders and a presence that made the room feel smaller. He walked straight to the wreckage, bypassing Tyler, who was trying to stand up, slipping on the wet soil. Escort the gentleman out, the head of security ordered, gesturing to two guards who hoisted Tyler up by his armpits. Tyler thrashed, shouting something incoherent about his rights and his father's lawyers. "Unhand him," Richard shouted, jumping down from the stage, nearly tripping in his haste. "Do you know who I am?" "I am Richard West. I own West Consultancy. I will buy this building and fire every single one of you." The head of security stepped into Richard's path. He was a head taller than my father, immovable as an oak tree. He removed his cap, revealing a face I hadn't seen in over a decade, but one I would never forget. The kind eyes were harder now, etched with lines of experience, but the integrity in them remained. It was Mike, my childhood neighbor, the man who had taken the job at the mall, the man who had found me on the bench when the lights went out 14 years ago. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. West." Mike said, his voice low, gravelly, and carrying a weight that silenced Richard mid-rant. Richard blinked, confused by the lack of deference. "Then you know you're making a mistake? My daughter, she's the unstable one. She set this up. She's been vindictive since she was a child. We tried to help her, but—" "Stop lying," Mike said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The authority in his tone was absolute. He turned to the onlookers, specifically locking eyes with Mrs. Vanderwall, the chairwoman of the board of directors, who was standing nearby with a look of appalled fascination. "I was the security officer on duty at the Bayview Mall 14 years ago," Mike announced, his voice carrying to the stunned circle of elites. "I found Zoe on a bench in the atrium at closing time. She had been waiting for 6 hours. Richard's face went pale, the blood draining away so fast he looked like a wax figure melting in the heat. Linda froze her hand, clutching her pearls, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I saw you," Mike continued, stepping closer to Richard. "I reviewed the security footage that night. I saw you park the car. I saw you leave her there, and I saw you drive away laughing. You didn't lose her, Richard. You discarded her." A ripple of shock went through the room, far more potent than the one caused by the falling flower. In this society, money could buy forgiveness for many things: adultery, embezzlement, even cruelty. But abandoning a child, that was a violation of the fundamental code of family values they all pretended to uphold. It was distasteful. It was monstrous. That's preposterous," Richard stammered, but the fight had gone out of him. He looked around the room for an ally, but found only walls of ice. The wealthy patrons who had been shaking his hand 10 minutes ago were now turning their backs, physically shielding themselves from the contagion of his reputation. "I was there," Mike said, finality in his tone. "And tonight I watched your son destroy a priceless exhibit because you were too busy stealing credit for a woman you threw away to notice he was drunk." Mike turned to the guards, holding a thrashing Tyler and the frozen Linda. "Get them out of here. They are banned from the premises. Permanently." "You can't do this," Linda wailed as a guard took her elbow. "We're high society. We're on the list." "Not anymore," Mrs. Vanderwall said, stepping forward. Her voice was icy. "Mr. Sterling, please ensure the West family is billed for the full value of the Midnight Orchid, and strike their names from the upcoming charity ball. We don't associate with this sort of element." The humiliation was total. It wasn't a violent end. It was a bureaucratic social excision. Richard West tried to muster one last glare at me, but he couldn't even meet my eyes. He looked small. He looked cheap. As the guards marched them toward the exit, Tyler dragging his feet, Linda sobbing about her coat, and Richard staring at the floor, the room erupted into a low buzz of whispers. They weren't whispering about me anymore. They were whispering about the monsters in cheap tuxedos. Mike turned to me. The hard lines of his face softened into the smile I remembered from when I was a kid, the one he gave me when he handed me a bottle of water that night at the mall. "You okay, Zoe?" he asked gently. I looked at the empty doorway where my past had just been escorted out. I looked at the dirt on the floor. For the first time in 14 years, the heavy weight in my chest, the fear that maybe I was bad luck, maybe I was the problem lifted. It floated away like dandelion seeds in the wind. "I'm fine, Mike," I said, and for the first time, I really meant it. "I'm actually really fine." There's a profound sense of relief when someone finally validates your truth after years of being gaslit. When a witness steps forward and says, "I saw it too, you aren't crazy." It can heal wounds you didn't even know were still bleeding. If you have ever had a moment where the truth finally came out and vindicated you, please leave a comment below. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The aftermath of the gala didn't happen with a bang, but with the swift, brutal efficiency of a corporate liquidation. In the weeks that followed, the West family didn't just fall from grace. They were systematically dismantled by the very society they had tried so desperately to impress. The bill for the destroyed Midnight Orchid, valued at $50,000, not including the antique trellis or the specialized cleanup fees, was sent directly to Richard West's firm. Rumor had it the shock of the invoice nearly caused him a coronary, but the real blow was the social excommunication. In our town, reputation is currency, and the Wests were bankrupt. The chairwoman, Mrs. Vanderwall, was true to her word. Richard's consultancy lost 3 major contracts by Monday morning. Linda was uninvited from the hospital auxiliary board via a curt email. Tyler, whose drunken antics had been captured on a dozen smartphones, became a local pariah, unable to walk into a bar without someone making a cracking sound to mock the trellis incident. Within 2 months, a for sale sign appeared on their manicured lawn. They moved 2 states away, retreating to a place where nobody knew their names, forced to start over in the obscurity that was for people like them, a fate worse than prison. But on the night of the gala, long after the last limousine had pulled away and the cleanup crews had swept the confetti from the marble floors, I found myself alone in the greenhouse. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It felt sacred, like the quiet inside a cathedral after the choir has gone home. I walked over to the taped-off area where the Midnight Orchid had stood. The mess had been cleared, the dirt swept up, but the broken ceramic pot remained on a cart nearby waiting for disposal. I picked up a fragment of the clay. It was cold and jagged. My heart gave a little squeeze of regret for the plant. It had been an innocent bystander in a human drama. I reached into the bucket where Mr. Sterling had tentatively placed the mangled remains of the plant. The stalk was snapped, the leaves bruised and torn. To the untrained eye, it was dead trash. But I wasn't an untrained eye. I was a gardener. I gently brushed the remaining soil from the base of the plant. There beneath the destruction, the rhizome, the thick knobby root system, was firm and white. It hadn't rotted. It hadn't shattered. The surface was destroyed, yes, but the core was alive. It would take time, maybe a year or 2 of careful nursing in the shade, but it would grow back. It would bloom again, perhaps even stronger for having been pruned so aggressively. I thought I'd find you here. I turned to see Mike standing in the archway of the greenhouse. He had changed out of his security blazer and was wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans, looking less like the imposing head of security and more like the neighbor who used to fix my bicycle chain. He held 2 bottles of cold water, offering one to me. "Checking for survivors?" he asked, nodding at the plant in my hands. "The roots are good," I said, accepting the water. The cool condensation felt grounding against my skin. "It just needs to be repotted. New soil, a different environment. It'll survive." Mike leaned against a potting bench, crossing his arms. "Sounds familiar." I smiled, a genuine, tired smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "Thank you, Mike, for tonight, for 14 years ago, for seeing me." "I didn't do anything special, Zoe." He shrugged, though his eyes were warm. "I just told the truth. I hated watching them strut around like they owned the place, like they owned you. I figured it was about time the record got set straight. You have no idea. I whispered. I spent so long thinking I was the problem, that I was the weed in their perfect garden. Tonight, watching them get escorted out, it was like finally pulling a thorn out of my foot. They were never the gardeners, Zoe, Mike said softly. They were just the pests. And you know what we do with pests. We ban them from the premises. I laughed, the sound echoing lightly against the glass walls. Exactly, Mike grinned. So what now? The big vengeance plot is over. The villains are vanquished. What does the heroine do? I looked around the greenhouse. I looked at the moonlight filtering through the glass, illuminating the thousands of plants I had curated. I thought about my team who had rallied around me when the trellis fell. I thought about Mr. Sterling, who had already promised to fund the rehabilitation of the orchid. I thought about the community I had built, not by blood, but by shared passion and mutual respect. Now, I said, setting the broken plant down gently on a bed of moss, now I just grow. I have a business to run. I have a garden to tend. And I think I'm going to finally stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mike pushed off the bench. Well, if you need a heavy lifter or just someone to make sure the weeds stay out, you know where to find me. I'm not going anywhere. I know, I said. And Mike, you're invited to the next one, as a guest, not security. I might take you up on that, he said. Come on, let me walk you to your car. It's late, and you've had a long decade. We walked out of the gilded trellis together, stepping into the cool night air. The stars were bright above us, indifferent and beautiful. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt lighter than I had in years. I realized then that my father was wrong about luck. Luck wasn't something you were born with, and it wasn't a finite resource you could use up. Luck was what you made when you refused to give up. It was the resilience to keep growing, even when the world tried to cut you down. I wasn't the West family's bad luck. I was my own good fortune. And as I walked toward my future, leaving the ghosts of my past at the gate, I knew that this was just the beginning of my season. Finding your chosen family, the people who stand by you when your biological family fails, is one of the most powerful forms of healing there is. It reminds us that we aren't defined by where we come from, but by who we choose to let into our lives. If you have found peace after walking away from toxic family members, or if you found a community that loves you for who you are, please leave a comment below. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. Zoe found her peace in the garden, but for many, the scars of family betrayal run deep. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save yourself, or found yourself vindicated after years of being misunderstood? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.